So the current lecture is going to go over how we deal with dates and times in Stata, and there's going to be three separate parts of the lecture. The first is how to transform a date or time into a number. The second is going to be how to display a number which represents a date or time in Stata. And then the third is how to convert numbers representing time into meaningful measures. Okay, so we're going to first address this first question here, which is how do we transform dates and times into a number? So basically we're going to do this using two different commands. So now remember, we're going to go dates and times into a number. This is usually going to happen as part of a generate command where you generate a new variable. And so you're going to generate a new variable equal to, you're going to use one or two different commands. Either you're going to use clock or you're going to use date. And each of these will be followed by parentheses where you have the variable name, which actually contains the date data, and then you're going to have in parentheses something which represents the format. Well, now I've just given you two different kind of subcommands over here. One is clock and one is date. So what's the difference? Well, you're going to use clock if you want to show the output in milliseconds, and date if you want to show the output in days. And milliseconds and days since what? So both of those are going to be milliseconds or days since just after midnight. So just the midnight immediately preceding January the 1st, 1960. Don't ask me why Stata chose that date, but that's what it is. So you're looking at milliseconds or days starting from this time point. I also mentioned something else over here. I mentioned something called format. Well, what does that mean? Well, format is composed of all of the different possible time elements. These include M for month, capital M for month, capital D for day, capital Y for year. If you have everything starting in a two-digit year, which I would recommend not doing because it can be confusing, especially since we're well into the 21st century, then you can have something like NY 19, capital Y, which is a two-digit year. And then there's also going to be now a set of, so remember, these are all going to be caps. And then you're going to have some lowercase ones too, which include H for hour. Again, this is going to be in military time, which is what I would recommend you use. Then minutes is capital S, small m is going to be minutes, and S is going to be seconds. So this is pretty complicated, but this is what you need to do. Remember, I would strongly recommend using military time and using a four-digit year to make your life easier, although there are workarounds for all these. So if you had a date, for example, which was October 31st, 2002, and there was a space, and then you had 18:03 and 17 seconds, then your format would be month, day, year, no, small case, hours, minutes, seconds. Right. So let's show you how this works. We're going to go to the Stata file that we've been working with, which is Yellow Pages. And if we go to the browser, you're going to see there's actually two dates here. One is DED, which is the date that information was entered. And then you're also going to see that YP1B, YP2B, and YP3B represent how long it took the individual to read each specific passage. And the data are shown in minutes and seconds, and there's also fractions of a second, which Stata will account for immediately. So you notice that when it's more than one, it'll just show you the minutes and the seconds, but not the sub-seconds. Okay. So let's go to Stata over here. And now let's say we want to calculate the date that data were entered in both milliseconds and in dates. So if we're going to calculate it in milliseconds, we're going to have to use the clock command. So we're going to say generate date entered. And it's going to be clock. And then the starting variable name, remember, that's going to be DED. And then we're going to put in quotes the format, which is date, month, date, year, hours, minutes, seconds. Very easy to make a mistake over here, in which case you'll start seeing that some of the data are missing. But be very careful about this, to getting it in the right order. And you don't see any missing numbers. We want to actually see how this compares to what we entered. And so we'll do that in a second. But let's go ahead and also create one that represents the days since 1960. So instead of using clock now, we're going to use date. All right, so now let's look at what these look like in the browser. So let's try and make our life easier by putting these after DED. And let's go to the browser now. And so now for the milliseconds, you see very, very large numbers shown in to 10 to the 12th, 1.6 times 10 to the 12th, whereas in days you're getting around 18,483. So this shows you the time in milliseconds since January 1st, 1960, and days since January 1st, 1960. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing now for YP1B, where now we're having the information in minutes and seconds. So of course now it doesn't really make any sense to use the date command, since everything is going to be well less than 1 day. So let's go ahead and generate time for passage 1 in milliseconds. And that's going to equal the clock command of the variable, which is YP1B. And it's going to be now in minutes and seconds only. You can see there was some missing data, so that generated also some missing values. Let's go ahead and put that new variable after the variable that we started with, so we can compare them directly. And let's look at it in the browser. So all the data that we're missing, it doesn't create a time for. But when you do have something, it's now showing you this time in milliseconds. Okay. So now that shows you the first part of our goals, which is how do you transform a date and time into a number. So now the issue with that is now we have these numbers, but actually these numbers are very, very hard to interpret. So it's actually hard to figure out what we mean by these numbers. The milliseconds isn't so bad, but when we're actually looking at something which is a date over here, it's not very convenient to actually look at it in this format. So let's go back to Stata, and now we actually want to show you how to demonstrate these commands. And if you ever wonder exactly how to do this, you can actually look at this PDF here. You can type in Stata dates into Google, and you find something over here which tells you how you work with dates and times, although this is a particularly difficult user file to use. And it also, if you take it further, you can also go to displaying dates and times as well, which will show you how to actually show it in various ways as well. So Now let's go ahead and, so these are the different display formats that you can use, and we'll go ahead and show you how you do this real quick. So you're going to use it essentially with this format command. And so if we go back to Stata over here, so if you want to format the date entered in days, I only really format things in one way, and there are a whole bunch of different formats that one could use, which show you things in a number of different ways, as illustrated over here on this date time display formats PDF. But I pretty much always use this %TC, both lowercase. So that shows you everything in terms of the dates, month, the year, hours, minutes, seconds. If you don't want the hours, minutes, seconds, then you can show it. You can use %TD, which just gives you dates, month, and year. Okay, so if we say here %TC, and now go to the browser, you actually get a date and then an hour, minutes, seconds. For some reason, it actually creates a little bit of an error over here. Maybe because it's not taking everything as absolute midnight. It's adding a few seconds here or there, which is one of the reasons not to kind of convert these back and forth or really pay attention to the seconds. If you don't even want those seconds and you just want to look at the date, you can enter %TD, and then you go to the data browser, and it gives you something which is now essentially the same as what you had before. So again, here it's August 9th, 2010. Here it's 9th of August, 2010. So it's showing you basically the same thing in the format that I like to see it. So that's one way of basically showing you dates in a format that's in Stata format, but it actually still is Stata is still considering that a number. So when you do that, it's actually still a number. So let's go ahead and describe what we just did. So you can use the display var name %TC, and that'll show you everything in date, or I'm sorry, I believe it's month, day, year, hours, minutes, seconds, or you can use display var name %TC, I'm sorry, %TD, and that'll show you date, month, and then year. You have to remember that even though it's showing you the date in this format, so Stata still considers the value as a number since 1960. So you can still do operations and everything else. It's actually just taking this as a number, but just simply showing it to you. So it's simply to display this way, but not the actual value in the variable. And we'll go over this concept somewhat in the assigned worksheet. So the final thing you may want to do is if you actually have, something like days, or you have something like milliseconds, how do you actually convert that into numbers that you might actually care about? So you might, instead of looking at days, you might want to look at years or months, for example. Instead of milliseconds, you may want to look at seconds or minutes or hours, right? So if we go back to our data set, if we tabulate this data over here, you're seeing a range of numbers all in milliseconds. But we don't really want to see that in milliseconds. We're going to want to see it, for example, in seconds. So we're going to have to make a transformation. So we're going to say generate equal to that value times 1,000 divided by 1,000. So we're going from seconds to milliseconds. And let's go ahead and compare that now. Okay, so if we go to the data browser and look at that now, instead of 80,000 milliseconds, you're looking at 80 seconds. So this is something which is going to be a lot easier for to use. And so you're going to want to try and move these into units that are much easier and much more intuitive to analyze. So let's do the same thing for the date entered in days. So let's go ahead and generate date entered in years since 1960, that is, equal to, now we're going to divide days by 365.25. Remember, there's a leap year every 4 years, so the average duration of a year is 365.25. Again, let's show this right next to the past variable, so we can line them up right next to each other. And let's look at it in the data browser. And so now, instead of looking at the date entered in years, which remember now, we've actually not shown in days anymore. We've shown it in a Stata format, which is showing it as a date. You can actually look at this in terms of the number of years that have transpired since 1960. Okay. Going forwards, we're going to apply this not necessarily to things such as this, which may not have any clinical meaning in terms of entry date, but we are going to use it frequently for dates of birth to calculate ages, and for other time outcomes to look at seconds or minutes. And we'll go over this more in detail in our worksheet. Thank you.